Tonight, you don't need to figure anything out. You don't need to decide where you belong. You don't need to name what feels unsettled. If you're here, it's probably because something in you has been searching, not loudly, not urgently, just quietly wondering where to rest. Some nights feel like that. The body is tired, but the mind keeps drifting, not toward thoughts exactly, but toward a feeling that something is missing, a sense that you're not quite where you should be. There's no need to push that feeling away. For now, let this be a place where nothing has to be solved. You don't have to arrive anywhere tonight. You don't have to belong anywhere in particular. Just being here is enough. As you lie down, notice the simple weight of your body, the way the surface beneath you holds you without asking anything in return. You may still feel unsure. That's all right. Belonging doesn't always feel warm or clear. Sometimes it feels quiet. Sometimes it feels empty. Sometimes it feels like not knowing, and even that can rest. You don't need to hold yourself together right now. You don't need to carry today any further. Let the breath move on its own. No need to slow it down. No need to guide it. Just notice that it's happening without your effort. Tonight, this moment doesn't need a name. This place doesn't need an explanation. You can let the search pause here, not because it's finished, but because it's allowed to rest. Stay with the sound of this voice for a little while. You don't have to listen closely. You don't have to remember anything. If your attention drifts, let it drift. There is nothing you could miss. For now, this is enough. You don't have to picture anything right now. Nothing needs a shape. Nothing needs an image. There were times, long before tonight, when people found comfort without seeing it. They didn't need something to look at. They didn't need something to hold. They only needed to know that a place existed where they could pause, not a place they owned, not a place they controlled, just a place they could return to in their own way. It wasn't loud. It wasn't bright. It didn't explain anything. It simply reminded them that they were not alone in the middle of everything. You might recognize that feeling, not as a memory, but as a quiet familiarity, like knowing where something is without having to point to it, like remembering a feeling without remembering a scene. Tonight can be like that. You don't need to imagine a safe place. You don't need to build one in your mind. You don't need to go anywhere else. Sometimes rest doesn't come from arriving somewhere new, but from remembering that you were already held by the ground, held by the stillness, held by the simple fact that you can stop moving for a while. Notice how nothing is being asked of you right now. You are not expected to understand. You are not expected to improve this moment. You are not expected to feel peaceful. Even uncertainty can be allowed here. There were people who came back to the same quiet place again and again, not because it changed, but because they did. Each time they brought different worries, different hopes, different tiredness, and the place didn't respond. It didn't judge. It didn't offer answers. It simply stayed. That kind of stillness doesn't disappear when you close your eyes. It doesn't vanish when you stop paying attention. It waits. You don't need to keep watch. You don't need to stay alert. If your thoughts wander, let them. They don't need direction. Rest doesn't require focus. It doesn't require effort. It happens when effort is no longer needed. You may notice small sensations now. The temperature of the room, the weight of your limbs, the slow, natural rhythm of breathing. None of this needs correction. You don't need to make the breath deeper. You don't need to make the body heavier. Everything already knows how to settle on its own. There is a kind of belonging that doesn't feel like arriving. It feels like stopping, like setting something down that you didn't realize you were carrying. For a moment, you don't have to decide who you are or where you fit. You don't have to hold a role in place. You don't have to keep a story intact. You can let yourself be undefined here. A place without shape can still be a place of rest. A place without words can still feel familiar. If you notice a sense of space opening, not outward, but inward, you don't need to follow it. Just let it be there. You are allowed to pause without knowing what comes next. You are allowed to rest without earning it. Stay with this quiet for a little longer or drift away from it. Either is fine. Nothing important depends on your attention. This place doesn't disappear when you stop looking for it. Even so, there are times when quiet is not enough, times when stillness feels too empty, too open, when the mind begins to search for something it can recognize, something it can see. On nights like that, the heart doesn't want explanations. It wants reassurance. It wants to know that something is there. So people began to give shape to what they trusted, not to define it, not to control it, but to feel closer to it, a form you could return to, a presence you could face, something steady when everything else felt uncertain. You may notice this in yourself. When you're tired, your eyes want to rest on something familiar, a shape, a light, a quiet outline in the room, not because it solves anything, but because it stays. There's nothing wrong with that. Wanting something visible is not a weakness. It is how the mind learns to rest when words are too much. Form can be gentle. Form can be quiet. A shape does not have to speak to offer comfort. Sometimes it simply reminds you that you are not drifting alone. Tonight you don't need to picture anything clearly, but you might notice how your attention naturally settles when it has something simple to land on. The rise of the chest, the softness of the dark, the steady presence of this moment. You don't have to hold it in place. Just let it be there. There were times when people sat in front of something they trusted, not to ask for answers, but to let their thoughts slow down. They didn't expect instructions. They didn't expect change. They allowed the silence to do its work. You can do the same now. If your mind wants something to rest on, let it choose. The sound of this voice, the rhythm of breathing, the feeling of being supported, none of it needs meaning, none of it needs interpretation. Form is not here to teach you anything. It's here to let you stop searching for a moment. If your thoughts start to wander again, that's fine. They always do. You don't need to bring them back. They will settle when they're ready. Notice how even seeing, even sensing, does not require effort. It happens on its own. You don't need to hold the image of yourself together. You don't need to be clear about who you are tonight. For now, it's enough to let something simple stand in your awareness without asking anything of you. And if even that begins to fade, you don't need to stop it. Form can disappear without taking safety with it. You are still here, still supported, still allowed to rest. And still there are nights when even gentle shapes are not enough, nights when the mind doesn't feel quiet, when it doesn't feel soft, when it feels crowded, uneven, restless, thoughts overlap, feelings rise without warning, old worries return without asking permission. On nights like that, you might feel as if something inside you is wrong, as if you should be calmer, clearer, more settled than you are. But there have always been times when calm was not the starting point, times when people carried fear, confusion, and intensity with them into the places they trusted. They did not wait until their minds were peaceful. They came as they were, with racing thoughts, with sharp emotions, with parts of themselves they didn't fully understand, and they were not turned away. Not everything that brings rest looks gentle at first. Some forms were created not to soothe, but to include what felt overwhelming, because fear doesn't disappear when it's ignored. It tightens, it grows louder, but when it's allowed to exist without being pushed aside, it can begin to soften on its own. You may notice that tonight. The mind might still be active. Images may come and go. Feelings may rise and fall. You don't need to correct any of it. There is room here for a mind that isn't quiet yet. There is room here for thoughts that feel too sharp, too fast, or too heavy. Nothing inside you is being measured. Nothing is being judged. You don't have to become peaceful in order to rest. Rest can happen even while the mind is unsettled, even while the body is still learning how to let go. Some nights, belonging doesn't feel warm. It doesn't feel safe or gentle. It feels unfamiliar, intense, unclear, and that doesn't mean it's absent. It means it hasn't simplified itself yet. You are allowed to bring everything with you tonight, even the parts you usually hide, the impatience, the tension, the thoughts that won't slow down. They don't need to disappear for sleep to arrive. You don't need to sort them out. You don't need to understand where they came from. Just notice that they are present and still allowed to be here. There were expressions of trust that did not look peaceful at all. They looked fierce, complex, alive, not because something had gone wrong, but because they were meant to hold the full range of human experience. Not just clarity, but confusion, not just calm, but urgency, not just light, but shadow. You may feel some of that now, a tightness somewhere in the body, a pull of attention that won't settle. Let it be there. You are not required to relax it away. You are not required to replace it with something softer. Sometimes safety comes not from changing how you feel, but from knowing that how you feel does not disqualify you. Even a restless mind belongs somewhere. Even a tired, complicated heart has a place to rest. If you notice resistance, a desire to escape this moment, you don't need to follow it, and you don't need to fight it either. Let it pass through. like weather moving across a wide sky. You don't have to become the sky. Just notice that there is space. The body may begin to respond now, not suddenly, not dramatically, just small signals of letting go. A breath that deepens on its own, a shoulder that releases slightly, a sense of weight returning to where it belongs. Nothing here is forced. Nothing is corrected. You are not being shaped into calm. Calm will find you when it's ready. And if it doesn't, rest can still happen. Sleep doesn't require peace. It requires permission. Permission to stop trying. Permission to stop monitoring yourself. Permission to be exactly as you are for the rest of the night. You don't need to resolve anything before you sleep. You don't need to reach a better state. You are already allowed to rest here. Stay with this allowance for a little while longer, or let it fade as attention drifts. Nothing important is lost either way. After a while, something may begin to change. Not suddenly, not in a way that needs your attention, just a soft shift, as if the effort of holding yourself together is no longer necessary. You didn't decide to relax. You didn't tell anything to stop. It simply became possible to loosen your grip. The mind doesn't have to stay so close anymore. It doesn't have to lean in to check how things are going. It can rest a little farther back, not away from this moment, just less tightly wrapped around it. You don't need to imagine distance. You don't need to picture anything opening. This isn't about expanding outward. It's about noticing that there is more room here than you thought. Room to breathe without managing the breath. Room to exist without keeping track of yourself. The body continues to be held. The surface beneath you doesn't change. The room doesn't disappear. Everything that was supporting you before is still here. Nothing has been removed. And because nothing needs to be protected, nothing needs to be held so closely. Thoughts may still pass through. Sensations may still rise and fade, but they don't arrive with urgency. They don't ask to be solved. They don't pull you toward them. They simply move and move on. You don't need to follow. You don't need to return. You don't need to stay present. Awareness can soften the same way the body does when it realizes it is safe to rest. You might notice moments when you forget to listen, moments when the words blur together. That's not something to correct. That's rest beginning to happen. There were ways of understanding safety that did not depend on being alert. Ways of resting that came from knowing that nothing was required, not because everything was perfect, but because everything necessary was already in place. You may sense that now as a quiet completeness. Not a feeling you need to hold on to, not a realization you need to remember, just a background sense that nothing is missing. You don't need to define yourself in this space. You don't need to know where you end and where anything else begins. That question can rest too. For a little while, you can exist without edges, without needing to be someone in particular, without keeping your story intact. You don't disappear. You don't dissolve. You remain exactly where you are, supported, grounded, allowed to soften. Even the effort to stay awake can be released. You don't have to listen carefully. You don't have to stay with these words. They're only here until you no longer need them. If attention drifts, let it. If thoughts thin out, let them. If awareness fades at the edges, that's all right. Nothing important depends on your clarity. The night doesn't need your understanding. The body doesn't need your guidance. They know how to move toward rest on their own. Breathing continues without instruction. The weight of the body settles without effort. You don't need to check whether you're doing this correctly. There is no correct way to rest. There is only the permission to stop trying. This moment doesn't need to be improved. You don't need to reach a deeper state. You don't need to stay here until something happens. This isn't a place you enter. It's one you were already in before you noticed. A sense of being included without explanation, of being supported without conditions. If sleep begins to pull you away from these words, you don't need to resist. You don't need to follow either. You can let everything continue without you. Nothing here depends on your attention. Everything necessary is already happening. There is another kind of rest that doesn't come from settling in. It comes from knowing that you don't have to go anywhere at all. Some nights even the idea of arriving feels tiring. Even the thought of finding your way feels like too much. On nights like that, rest doesn't ask you to move closer. It comes closer to you. You don't need to prepare for it. You don't need to be ready. You don't need to understand where it comes from or how it works. You don't need to open yourself in any special way. You only need to stop stepping forward. Notice how nothing is asking you to make progress right now. Nothing is waiting for you to catch up. Nothing is measuring how far you've come. There is no distance to cross tonight, no path to follow, no place you must arrive in order to rest. You can remain exactly where you are, lying down, breathing, letting the weight of the day sink out of your body. Some forms of safety don't stand in front of you. They don't point the way. They don't call your name. They don't ask you to move toward them. They come from the other side, not as a destination, but as a presence. Not something you reach, but something that reaches you. You don't need to meet it halfway. You don't need to turn toward it. You don't need to recognize it for it to be there. If your attention drifts now, that's all right. You don't need to hold it steady. You don't need to stay aware. Rest does not require attention. It does not require intention. It happens when nothing is being asked of you. There may be a quiet sense now that you are no longer responsible for where things go next. The night can take over. The body can continue towards sleep without guidance. Breathing deepens or stays shallow on its own. Muscles release or remain as they are. Everything is allowed. Nothing needs to change for rest to arrive. You don't need to let go faster. You don't need to sink deeper. You don't need to reach a calmer place. You are not being guided toward an outcome. You are simply being allowed to stop moving. Even the idea of belonging can soften here. You don't have to know where you belong. You don't have to feel that sense clearly. You don't have to feel it at all. Belonging doesn't always feel like warmth or certainty. Sometimes it feels like being met without effort, like being received without explanation, like being allowed to remain unfinished. You don't need to accept this. You don't need to trust it. You don't need to believe anything. It does not depend on your response. It does not disappear if you don't notice it. It can be present even as attention fades, even as thoughts thin out, even as sleep begins to pull you under. You don't need to notice that moment. You don't need to mark when it happens. If you drift away in the middle of a sentence, nothing is lost. If you remain awake, nothing is wrong. This rest is not conditional. It doesn't depend on how deeply you sleep. It doesn't depend on how long you listen. It doesn't depend on how well you let go. You are not being evaluated. You are not being corrected. You are not being improved. You are simply allowed to stop trying. Let the night carry what you've been holding. Let it take over what no longer needs your attention. You don't need to stay with these words. They can fade as soon as they're no longer useful. You don't need to follow them to the end. Nothing here requires your participation. Everything necessary is already moving in the right direction. You don't need to stay with these words any longer. They don't need your attention now. They don't need to be followed or understood. They can begin to rest just like everything else. There is nothing here you have to remember, nothing you need to carry forward into sleep. The meaning can soften first. The sentences can blur next. You don't have to notice when that happens. The body already knows how to continue without guidance. Breathing moves without instruction. The weight of your body is already finding where it belongs. There is no need to keep listening carefully, no need to stay alert. If your awareness drifts in and out, that's all right. You don't need to bring it back. You don't need to hold this moment together. Nothing here depends on your clarity. Nothing is waiting for you to finish. If sleep has already begun to pull you away, you don't need to resist. You don't need to mark the moment it starts. You don't need to decide whether it has arrived. If you are still awake, that's fine too. Nothing is being delayed. Nothing is being missed. There is no correct timing for rest. From here, words don't need to lead anymore. They can slow down. They can thin out. They can step aside without being dismissed. You might notice that sound matters more than meaning now. The gentle rise and fall of the voice, the spaces between phrases, the quiet that follows each sentence. You don't need to stay with any of it. You can let the sound pass through awareness without holding on, just as you might notice a distant noise at night without turning toward it. The night doesn't ask for your attention. It doesn't need your participation. It continues whether you notice it or not. The same is true here. You don't need to stay present. You don't need to stay awake. You don't need to let go in any special way. Let the body continue in its own rhythm. Let muscles soften or remain as they are. Let breathing find its natural pace. Nothing needs to be adjusted. Nothing needs to be improved. You are not required to relax more deeply. You are not required to sink faster. You are not required to reach a quieter state. Rest is already happening in its own way, even if it feels subtle, even if it feels incomplete, even if it doesn't feel like anything at all. You can stop checking now. Stop listening for cues. Stop waiting for the next line. The words will continue for a little while longer, but you don't have to. You can drift away at any point. You won't miss anything. Nothing important is being said anymore. This is just sound moving through the dark, just time passing gently, just the night doing what it does best, holding you without asking anything in return. From here, you can allow sound to remain after words fade. Not something to follow, not something to understand, just something that stays as attention loosens. You don't need to stay for it. You don't need to leave either. Let the night continue in its own rhythm. Let the body sink a little deeper into the surface beneath you and allow everything else to rest. You don't need to move forward anymore. There is nowhere else this moment needs to go. Time can slow down here or lose its shape altogether. You don't need to know how long you've been listening. You don't need to know what comes next. The idea of later can rest now. There is no schedule for sleep, no moment you have to reach. The night is not progressing toward anything. It is simply continuing. You can let yourself stay exactly as you are, not improving, not drifting, just remaining. If thoughts appear, they don't need to be followed. If they fade, they don't need to be held. Nothing here is moving quickly. Nothing is asking you to keep up. You don't need to track whether you are awake or asleep. That question can rest too. The body does not measure time. It only responds to safety and stillness. Breathing continues without counting. The weight of your body does not change from moment to moment. It simply stays. You can allow yourself to stay with it. No effort is required. No attention is required. Even the sense of being here can soften. You don't need to locate yourself. You don't need to notice the room. You don't need to listen closely. Everything can become a little less defined, like the edges of a thought blurring before sleep. Nothing is wrong if things feel vague. That is the night doing its work. You can stay here without waiting, without expecting, without preparing for anything else. This moment does not lead to another. It simply rests within itself. From here, there is nothing you need to anticipate. Nothing is about to happen. Nothing new is arriving. The night does not bring instructions. It does not bring conclusions. It does not bring surprises. It only continues to hold. You don't need to stay alert in case something changes. Nothing requires your response. Nothing requires your readiness. You can stop listening for the next phrase. The words are no longer guiding you. They are simply passing through. If you drift away, they will continue without you. If you remain awake, they will remain gentle. Either way, nothing is lost. You don't need to stay connected. You don't need to let go deliberately. You don't need to do anything at all. The body already knows how to move deeper into rest. The mind already knows how to loosen. Even awareness can fade at the edges. There is no need to bring it back. Nothing important depends on it. This is not a transition. This is not a doorway. There is no after you need to reach. Just the quiet continuation of the night, just sound and time and rest. You can allow everything to become less clear, less distinct, less necessary, until words no longer matter, until listening is optional, until sleep arrives or doesn't, and either is fine, nothing more is coming, Nothing more is needed. You don't need to stay awake to listen to this, not in the way you usually stay awake, not with attention, not with effort. You can let your awareness come and go. You can let it drift closer to the surface of sleep and then pull back again without deciding anything. Nothing here requires your full presence. Nothing here depends on your understanding. Even now, you may notice that listening does not feel the same as it did earlier. The words arrive, but they don't land as clearly. They overlap slightly. They blur at the edges. That is not a mistake. That is the night beginning to take over. You don't need to resist it. You don't need to encourage it either. You don't need to check whether you are still awake or already drifting. That question no longer matters. The body does not wait for a clear signal. It responds when it feels safe to stop holding itself together. Breathing continues, sometimes deep, sometimes shallow, sometimes uneven. You don't need to regulate it. You don't need to follow it. It is already moving in the direction of rest. The weight of your body remains where it is. You may notice it more clearly for a moment, or you may forget it entirely. Both are signs that nothing needs to be done. There is no task left, no instruction left, no next step. The day has already ended. Even if your thoughts return briefly, memories, fragments, unfinished pieces, they do not need your response. They can pass through without being completed, without being resolved, without being followed to their end. You don't need to hold the thread of thought anymore. It can loosen, it can drop, and if another thought appears, it can do the same again and again. Nothing here is cumulative. Nothing builds toward anything. This is not a process you need to complete. It is a slowing that happens when nothing interrupts it. You might notice moments now where the words feel distant, as if they are coming from another room, or as if they are arriving slightly later than you expect. That distance is welcome. You don't need to close it. You don't need to listen more carefully. You don't need to stay with the sentence until it finishes. You can let the sentence finish without you. If your awareness fades midway through a thought, that is exactly where rest begins. Nothing important is happening in the words anymore. They are only here to keep the space open until you no longer need them. You don't need to mark that moment. You don't need to notice when it happens. Sleep does not announce itself. It does not wait for permission. It arrives when attention is no longer required. And even if it does not arrive fully, rest can still deepen. You can float at the edge without falling in. You can hover without effort. You don't need to decide. You don't need to choose. The night is patient. It does not rush you. It does not expect anything from you. You can let your awareness become soft, loose, unfocused. You don't need to keep your eyes closed in any particular way. You don't need to relax your face. Everything can remain exactly as it is while rest continues underneath. If you stop hearing the words clearly, that is fine. If they turn into sound only, that is fine. If they disappear entirely, that is better. You are not missing anything. Nothing here is meant to be held. Nothing here is meant to be remembered. This is simply time passing without demand, sound passing without meaning. the night holding you without asking you to stay awake. You can let go now, or later, or not at all. Everything continues either way. You don't have to fall asleep to let rest deepen. You don't have to cross from one state into another. You can drift without going anywhere. You can hover without effort. There is no edge you need to step over, no moment where something suddenly changes. Rest does not arrive as an event. It spreads slowly, quietly, without asking you to notice. You may feel awake and not awake at the same time. Thoughts may still appear, but they don't feel solid. They don't connect the way they usually do. They loosen, separate, fade before they finish. You don't need to follow where they were going. You don't need to keep track of how many there are. They can come and go without forming anything. Your attention can rest lightly on whatever is closest. The sound of this voice, the rhythm of breathing, the sense of weight where your body meets the surface beneath you. And when attention slips away, you don't need to bring it back. It can return or not return on its own. Nothing here depends on consistency. Nothing here depends on staying with the experience. The body understands rest without instruction. It releases in small, uneven ways, a jaw loosening without your permission, a shoulder dropping without explanation, a breath changing pace without a reason. You don't need to notice these things. They can happen outside awareness. You don't need to be present for rest to continue. You don't need to witness it. There is no reward for paying attention longer. There is no benefit to staying awake. You are not required to hear every word. You are not required to stay until the end of a sentence. If awareness fades midway through a phrase, that is not interruption. That is rest doing what it does. Time does not need to make sense here. Moments can stretch, overlap, or disappear. You don't need to measure how long you've been here. You don't need to wonder how much longer this will last. There is no finish line. There is no next stage, just the gentle continuation of the night. If the idea of sleep feels distant, that's fine. If it feels close, that's fine too. You don't need to move toward it. You don't need to wait for it. It will come or it won't without effort. You can rest right here in the in-between, not fully awake, not fully asleep, just drifting. Nothing pulls you forward, nothing pulls you back. Everything is allowed to remain incomplete. You don't need to hold awareness together now. It doesn't need to stay sharp. It doesn't need to stay continuous. It can thin out the way light fades at the end of the day, gently, unevenly, without a clear boundary. You may notice gaps between thoughts, small spaces where nothing appears. You don't need to fill them. You don't need to stay inside them. They can open and close on their own. Listening no longer needs to be intentional. Sound can arrive without being processed. Words can pass without forming meaning. You don't need to understand what is being said. You don't need to remember it. The voice can become just another sound in the room, or another rhythm moving through the dark. You don't need to stay connected to it. If it fades into the background, let it. If it disappears entirely, even better. Nothing here depends on your awareness staying intact. The body does not rely on conscious attention to rest. It settles when nothing interferes. Breathing continues without guidance. The heart keeps its rhythm without supervision. Muscles soften or remain tense in their own time. You don't need to help. You don't need to check. Even the sense of you can become less defined. Not gone, just less important, less centered, less necessary. You don't need to know where you are in relation to anything. You don't need to know what state you are in, awake, asleep, somewhere in between. These labels are no longer useful. You can let them drop. You can let everything become simpler, not clearer, just quieter, less distinct, less demanding. If moments feel longer or shorter, that doesn't matter. If time feels absent, that's natural. The night does not move in straight lines. It loosens, it spreads, it holds without structure. You don't need to stay with this process. You don't need to wait for it to finish. There is nothing you are meant to reach, just the gradual thinning of effort, the gradual softening of awareness, until listening is optional, until sound is enough, until sleep arrives without announcement, or until rest deepens without sleep. Either way, nothing is required from you. Everything continues on its own. There is nothing else you need to do. Sometimes peace is not something we must learn. It is something we remember. The world pulls us outward, toward goals, toward noise, toward endless motion. But when the heart grows quiet, we begin to sense a deeper rhythm beneath it all, a rhythm that has always been waiting, softly calling us home. This quiet home lives inside you, but it can be easy to forget. That is why Gassho exists, not to add anything new, but to help you return. A space built for stillness, for reflection, for the gentle work of being. In its name, Gassho, there is a gesture, two hands meeting in respect and gratitude, a gesture of unity between self and world, between heart and breath, between sound and silence. When you open the Gassho app, you are not entering another screen. You are stepping into a small temple that travels with you, a place where you can sit without expectation, breathe without demand, and listen without effort. Inside you will find guided meditations, stories inspired by Buddhist wisdom, and the steady presence of sutras, not as lessons, but as companions. The sound you are about to hear is one of those companions, a sound carried through generations, a sound shaped by breath, devotion, and time. You do not need to understand the words. You do not need to follow the rhythm. You do not need to stay awake for it. Let the sound arrive as it is. Let it move through awareness without resistance. Let it remain even as attention fades. There is nothing left to do, only to rest. Let the breath settle. Let the body sink, and simply listen. The sound of the sutra continues, offered from a temple in the quiet mountains of Koya-san, shared here through the Gassho app whenever you wish to return to silence.
Thank you. 諸種へご愛念頂 reassurance.